Okay, again, welcome everybody who's here. We really appreciate you being here. I'm Dave Sly, Conservation Director for Wild Virginia. And sorry about my voice. Kylie McClatchy, also from Wild Virginia, is here helping me out, trying to keep me on track with all the technology. So let me go try to figure out how to work my slides. Whoops. I went all the way to the end of my slides. See, that shows that I need help with my technology. Okay, so as I just told Kylie, we have started recording this, so it's going to be available to you and other folks if you can share it later. As we start out here, if you would like, throw your name in the chat, let us know who you are, and if you want to tell us anything about why you're here, where you're from, anything like that. It's always good to know who we're working with. And finally, during the program, please go ahead and put questions in the chat. I'll do the very best I can to reach all those, but if we can't, we can also follow up. So without further ado, why are we here? We all know that there are great threats from Mountain Valley Pipeline restarting construction, but we do intend to insist that they be held to the strictest standards that we can. Our government officials have a serious responsibility to take care of us and our communities and our resources. Often in the past, they haven't done the great job of that, but we're going to insist that they do better now. You know, what can happen once we get going is that if there are serious problems like there have been in the past, that there can be stop work orders given. And that's part of the reason we're here, is to talk about how that can happen, especially through the state of Virginia. And what we know is that they really can't meet the environmental requirements that they're faced with. And that should still be a basis for them, for this project never being finished. And we're not giving up on that. We think that's still a possibility, and it's what should happen. So before I get into that, the main issue that I'm here for, I did want to at least mention the ongoing legal actions. And I know there's way too much on this slide, but I can boil it down a little bit in case you haven't kept up with that. There were, I'm sorry about my voice. There were some lawsuits underway before Congress and the White House stepped in and changed the law to try to push MVP to completion. One of those was against the Fish and Wildlife Service over its Endangered Species Act approvals. And one was against the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management over giving them the ability to cross the Jefferson National Forest. After the law was passed, which tried to force, you know, all these things to be done and to take away our right to go to court, we decided that we would challenge that issue because we believe that's unconstitutional. We believe that shutting us out of the court, even though we had those ongoing cases started, is a violation of the Constitution. So we have answered motions to dismiss both of those cases by arguing to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals that they should reject those motions. And we intend to pursue those. Now, there were also some cases in the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. And frankly, the situation is a little bit complicated there, and I'm not going to get into much detail. But we expect, frankly, for the most recent of those likely to be dismissed because it's in kind of a different situation than those in the Fourth Circuit. anyway, what you need to know is that our lawyers are great litigators, are fighting hard to pursue those arguments, and we think that they have great merit. So, oh gosh. Okay. So there are a whole list of agencies that have responsibilities to enforce environmental laws in relation to the pipeline. And that's a list of them there. You know, we intend to be pushing all of those to do their jobs. But I have a special kind of focus on the state of Virginia and their responsibilities. And that's mainly what I want to talk about tonight. Now, the officials in Virginia who really have that responsibility include the Department of Environmental Quality and the State Water Control Board. If you're not familiar with the way Virginia's water quality regulations work, the State Water Control Board is a citizen board of people from across the state and different walks of life who are supposed to be, kind of our representatives, our neighbors, our colleagues in Virginia, to look out for our interest. Then the Department of Environmental Quality is the agency that works under the administration, but they answer to the Water Control Board. So it's important for us to keep both of them in mind and to make our cases to both of them going forward. I just want to, kind of emphasize how important it is for the volunteers, the ones who have been out there, they're doing the observations and the sampling throughout the years, and how important it is that we keep doing that. The fact is that the evidence that citizens gathered was one significant and important part of our comments to agencies and the court cases that we were involved in. And, frankly, it's because of that good work and because we kept winning in court that they took this extreme measure of going to Congress to try to change the rules. But that same investment, that same contribution from citizens is going to be just as important going forward. So if you're along the pipeline route, if you're a landowner, if you're somebody who uses the national forest or whatever, you have an important stake, and we will value your involvement. But even if you're not, there are roles that you can play. And I'm going to say a little bit later, but we always send out a follow-up email to these programs, and we'll give you more information on how you can be involved if you have not been so far. Now, the authorities under which the state of Virginia, the DEQ and the Water Board operate in relation to the pipeline come from two main laws, the Federal Clean Water Act and the Virginia State Water Control Law. They have some similar authorities and some similar requirements that apply here. Now, specifically for the pipeline, there were two approvals that the state of Virginia issued, and they're called water quality certifications. One is for so-called upland construction. One was for water body crossings, where the pipeline or other parts of the project would directly cross streams or wetlands. So that raises the question, what's a water quality certification? And it's pretty simple. There's a section of the Clean Water Act, Section 401, that says if a federal agency is looking at giving a permit or a license to an activity, and that activity may cause a discharge to your state's waters, then you have the chance to say no. Very simply, a state can veto such a permit or a license, or they can certify it to say, yes, we think it will meet our water quality standards. They can also place conditions on that certification, and Unfortunately, Virginia issued both of those certifications, the upland and the water body crossing. But they did place conditions on them. They placed quite a few requirements in there. We certainly don't think they're sufficient, but they are important and they will be useful to us. So going first to what they call the Upland Water Quality Certification. If you've been involved, you'll remember that that was issued way back in December of 2017. And that covers all the parts of the pipeline that are not directly related to water body crossings, all the parts that are not regulated by the Corps of Engineers. And it includes, as I say, a bunch of regulations, including provisions from our Stormwater Management Act, our Erosion Sediment Control Law, and some other legal requirements. And it's really important to keep that upland work in mind because there's a lot still to be done in Virginia. I think some people have gotten into the mode of thinking, well, there's all these water body crossings, but that's about it. And that's just not true. Some of the most sensitive areas still haven't even been cleared, much less having the trenches dug or blasted through the ground. And so there's a ton of work left to do. And that's going to be really important that we pay attention to that until they get into what they call final restoration. We know that they will continue to cause erosion and sediment discharge problems because that has been a pretty constant occurrence throughout the process. We did a calculation that, and I don't remember the numbers, but just by all the activity that they're going to do with clearing and trenching and moving of heavy equipment, we're talking millions of tons of dirt that's going to be excavated and moved around. Now, in relation to those upland certifications, we did get the General Assembly to pass a new law or an amendment to the law in early 2021 that kind of expanded the authorities for the DEQ to oversee these operations and specifically really strengthened the stop work provisions in the law. And there are two pieces of the law, and as you can see, they deal with the Stormwater Management Act and the Erosion Sediment Control Law, which are as I say, they're incorporated into the upland certification. And part of the reason that I think that's so important is when citizens are doing their observations, when they're documenting what's going on, and when we're making reports to the agencies, it's important that we know what those rules are so that we can aim those complaints and our assertions as to what should be done. We can base it on what the law says is possible. We can base it on what it says DEQ has a duty to do. And then, as I say, there's a separate water quality certification that deals specifically with crossings of wetlands and streams. It was issued much more recently in December of 2021. And because it just looks at the areas that the Corps of Engineers regulates, it's specifically for work in the streams and just adjacent to those streams where you can have direct discharge of materials, sediments, and dirt and other materials directly into the water bodies. Now, there are more than 400 of those that are still to be done in Virginia. And that includes discharges from the water body or the crossing of the pipe itself, but it also includes some from access roads and other activities. And I would tell you from example that sometimes those roads and other parts have caused some really serious problems also, so we can't ignore those. One requirement that is really notable in that certification for the crossings is it explicitly says that water quality standards shall not be violated in these activities. And I'm going to talk quite a bit more about water quality standards, but that's an important provision there. So it's vital that we keep those requirements in mind. Now, as I say, that amendment to the law that kind of changes or adds to the authority to stop work, that came into effect in early 2021. And what has to happen for DEQ to issue what's called, I'm really sorry about my voice. What's required is for DEQ to make a finding that the activities, the land disturbance that MVP is doing has caused one of two things: either a substantial adverse impact to water quality, and I've put the quotes because it's exactly what the law calls for, or an imminent and substantial adverse impact to water quality that's likely to occur. So either you've already had damage to your waters, or you have a situation where it is almost certain to happen right away or very soon if you don't act. So what's an adverse impact, a substantial adverse impact? Well, we have these things called water quality standards. It's a regulation that has been in effect in Virginia since even before the Clean Water Act was passed back in the early 70s. And it is the obvious way that you decide whether your waters have been impacted in a way that's unacceptable. It includes a lot of provisions, including some numeric kind of criteria, targets for certain pollutants, but it also has something that's more general. Well, hold on a minute here. Okay, I'm sorry, I got kind of. Okay, I'll get more to water quality standards here in a minute, but let's look at the other part. I'm sorry, keep going back and forth here. The other part of that test as to whether a stop work order is justified, and that is the imminent adverse impacts are likely. So the way the law looks at that is that, MVP is supposed to maintain all these pollution controls, silt fences, and all the other things that they put into place. But when sediment has escaped beyond those measures, when it's been discharged off-site, whether it's onto the adjacent land or downstream into a water body, then that is a threat to continue pollution. I'm going to show you photos later where MVP just dumped tons and tons of mud on people's farmlands, on their properties. And that is a threat unless and until it's removed. That's a continuing threat to water quality. Every time it rains, it's going to run off. And so that's the measure. Whenever we find that, whenever the state finds that those kinds of deposits have been made off-site, then that's also a basis for a stop work order. Now, I can tell you that there have been, I think, nearly 700, I think it's 684 occurrences throughout the lifetime of the pipeline construction when this has occurred. Sometimes over 100 times it's gone actually into the water body, but many, many times on a constant basis, as long or in every period where construction was happening, these off-site discharges were occurring. So generally, a stop work order has been thought of as something along a long pipeline like this, as something that you would impose on a specific area. Okay, I've got a real problem here at this location, so I'm going to make them stop working here until they get that fixed. And in fact, that's exactly what DEQ did in the one occasion when they had MVP stop work order back in late 2019. They applied that to a 2-mile segment of the pipeline route, and basically said you got to fix whatever's wrong here in this specific area. And then when those particular fixes have been put in, they can say go ahead. What we know, though, is that, as I'm going to show on the pipeline, these problems have not just happened in some isolated areas. They have happened everywhere along the pipeline route. And of course, that goes for Virginia as well as West Virginia. And the problem then with addressing any specific places or isolated places is, even if you made them stop work order or stop work in Montgomery County, for example, they're going to move their crews somewhere else, down to Roanoke or Pennsylvania or wherever, and keep working and keep causing the same kinds of problems. And so what we got into the law, and I'll tell you that this amendment is there because of us, because of citizens like you and groups like ours, because we convinced our lawmakers that this was absolutely necessary. Some of those lawmakers had amended the law previously to include some of these authorities, and they saw that it was not working, and we helped show them that. And so we convinced them that when there are repeated, frequent, and widespread problems, pollution events, that you got to stop the whole thing if it just keeps happening. And so that's what they can do. DEQ, if you have this kind of systematic or systemic problem, they can stop work on the whole 100 plus miles in Virginia. And I will tell you, since 2021, as I'll explain a little bit, that should have happened in 2021 in the last period when active construction was underway, but it did not. And we're not going to accept that failure again. Again, if you have these kinds of recurring problems over and over again, you've got a problem, an underlying problem with the way you're approaching the whole system. If your silt fences and your compost socks and your other measures fail time after time, then you gotta redesign those things, or you got to admit that they're just not going to work. And unfortunately, we know that that's the case, and that's part of the reason that the project should still be stopped. So getting back to water quality standards, as I said, there are things in the standards that call for specific limits on specific kinds of pollution, but there's a broader kind of approach. We call it narrative criteria. And essentially, they're based on the fact that these water bodies should be usable for us, and they should be sustainable and healthy for wildlife, the kind of animals and plants that are supposed to live there, supposed to use those water bodies. And the term in the standards that is a problem is when an activity interferes with those uses. We have a right to use those water bodies. That is enshrined in the Clean Water Act and our state law. And when anybody discharges anything that would interfere with that, then we have a right to expect DEQ and the Water Board to act. Now, some of the specific things, some of the specific kinds of problems that the water quality standards list are turbidity, deposits, changes in color of the streams, floating materials, all those kinds of things. And again, we can demonstrate based on in part on citizen monitoring, but also in large part on the DEQ's own inspections, that all those parts of the water quality standards have been violated repeatedly. Here, just a couple examples. The one on the left is in Franklin County, and that's a volunteer's photograph. If that is not an unnatural color coming from a discharge into our waters, I don't know what is. And the one on the right is in Giles County, in Doe Creek. And that's a place where that stream looked like that for several thousand feet. So I don't think there's much argument that those conditions interfere, certainly with our uses. Would any of us want to use those streams, but also seriously impair them for aquatic life use? Places where you have deposits on the bottom of the stream. Again, this has been a chronic problem. It's happened over and over again. As I say, I think, well, about 110, 113 places that we know of. And those are the ones that are specifically documented by the state. We know there are others, but in many cases, those did cover, many feet, thousands, hundreds or thousands of feet of stream. And that's a serious impairment of those streams. And so it's clearly a water quality standards violation. And we've got to have DEQ acknowledge that and act accordingly. Again, this is just one of those places up in, I believe in Montgomery County, a small tributary. Actually, it's in the watershed where the endangered Roanoke log perch lives. And so this is the kind of problem they caused. And DEQ's own biologists, their own inspectors went out there and they made reports saying this would substantially disrupt the movement of the things that are supposed to be living here, which I guess should be obvious. But the fact that they were able to acknowledge that means they should have said this is a violation of water quality standards, but they did not. And that's just plain unacceptable. And again, making the water turbid. We all know that there are occurrences when we have heavy storms and we have rainstorms that streams become turbid. But when it's caused by discharges from an activity like this that is supposed to be regulated, that is unacceptable. The one on the right there, that photograph, is flowing specifically or directly into a tributary to Bradshaw Creek, which is absolutely, we know that the endangered Roanoke log perch lives there, has been sampled there, and they just cannot accept this kind of conditions. So, I could show you 100, I could show you 1,000 more examples of places where this kind of activity, this kind of impact have happened. Then we get to the imminent and substantial threats to water quality. The places where those controls that are supposed to stop the pollution from leaving the site just haven't worked. In part, sometimes because they haven't been installed correctly or at all, but in many cases where they've just plain failed because they did not work the way that we were promised they would work. And so, over and over that has happened. In many cases, it results in huge amounts of mud just being discharged off of sites and onto people's land. And again, that will sit there, that will continue to seep into our waters as long as it's there. It's as simple as that. So then the other part of that, requirement, you got the water quality impacts, you've got imminent threats or risk to water quality. The other part of that stop work authority is that if you have the repeated, frequent, and widespread problems, then that's part of the basis for having that broad stop work happen. And again, that has happened since that law was changed. And Virginia DEQ did not do its job and stop work. And that's why it's so important for us to know these rules and for us to insist specifically on how and why they should be enacted. Between June 10th and October 6th of 2021, which is the last period when MVP was doing really active construction, there were tons of times when sediment left the sites, 118 times in essentially 4 months, less than 4 months. And, you know, this at a time when they've been in construction for more than 3 years. And if they were able to solve these problems, or if they were willing to solve these problems, it should have been done by that time. So that just demonstrates how important it is for the state to take much stronger action to insist that these things get fixed. And again, during that time, 12 of those offsite sediment discharges and deposition was directly into streams or wetlands. And we get to the frequent part. You look at some specific times during that 2021 period, and just for a 5-day period, over and over, I mean, 4 out of the 5 days, DEQ or their inspectors documented these serious problems offsite deposits. I don't know what happened to June 13th. Maybe the inspectors weren't out there that day, but in any case, that's not an anomaly. I mean, there were plenty of times during that period, and of course in the years before, where you had problems day after day after day for a week or 2 weeks or more. So it meets that requirement, or has met that requirement of frequent problems on many occasions. And then we get to the widespread issue. Where is it happening? Is it located? Is it isolated to one particular area? And it absolutely has not been the case. I've listed here, you know, watersheds, and these are big areas within, you know, most of these watersheds. We're talking, you know, multiple streams, multiple individual water bodies that were impacted. But just during that period, that 4-month period in 2021, they hit all these areas. I think the one area we don't have anything represented here is down in what they call spread I, like in Franklin County, Pittsylvania County. Well, you know why? Because there was no real active construction going on in those areas during that time. But wherever there was construction, we were having these problems. So all of the criteria for doing that systemic, that widespread stop work have been met in the past. And unless DEQ is really stringent and really observant, it could happen again. And we're going to be on the lookout for that. I'll go back to the water quality standards issues. You know, Virginia, although they've had all these records, they've seen all of their own inspection reports, they've seen what volunteer monitors have reported over and over. You know, again, streams covered with mud, streams just really decimated for long stretches. And yet Virginia has not ever in this process admitted that water quality standards had been violated. And, you know, by contrast, West Virginia has done it many times. And, you know, West Virginia DEP is not an organization that's often bragged about as being really, really stringent on environmental rules, but they have really outshined Virginia by quite a lot. And that's just not going to be acceptable. So, you know, I want to say that I've run through a lot here, and I know this is maybe kind of dense material, especially if this is not something you've thought about before. But don't despair. As I say, we're recording this, it's going to be available, but we're also going to be here to follow up, to help you figure out if you're somebody who's out there on the land, if you're a monitor, if your property is affected, or if you just want to get involved otherwise. We're gonna be there to help you understand how these rules can be affected or can be in effect, and how we can present this information to the agencies, to decision makers, so that they understand the damages that are being done. And as I say here, you know, we've had many volunteers who've done water quality sampling, others that do visual assessments, who go out there and take photos and see the problems that are occurring. But there's also room for folks who aren't in those areas specifically. And I think we've had folks already sign up who live in other places, who may not even visit here, but who care about the rules being enforced here in Virginia, and who care about those resources. Again, everybody owns the Jefferson National Forest. It's ours. And even if you're not spending all your time there, you have a reason to want to protect it and all of these waters. So we always send an email the day after, as soon after these events as possible, to give you follow-up information. You know, you'll get the link to this recording. Please share it. You know, if you know other people who couldn't make it or who didn't know about this, share it with them. But also pay attention to those materials so that we can, if you have the ability and the will to help out with this effort, we need you. And so we're going to help you know how to do that. I want to recognize, you know, other organizations that are vital to this effort. They include Power, which and their Mountain Valley Watch program especially, which has been, you know, organizing and coordinating the monitoring and the surveillance for years now. And so they play that role, and they're the best. They and folks at West Virginia Rivers and others at helping you, you know exactly what to do when you're out there. And there are other trainings for that. This training is hoping to help you zero in on what's going to be most effective at stopping work, at stopping damage here in Virginia. I want to also recognize folks like Appalachian Voices, 7 Directions of Service, other folks who are just so important as allies and partners in this effort. So anyway, we're going to share a range of information with you going forward. And I'm going to stop now. And I think, one more thing I'm supposed to show you here. And being technically illiterate as I am, I have no idea how to use this. But if you know how to use it, Wild Virginia has lots of great programs. And, you know, they're not all pipeline centered. There's fun stuff sometimes with, you know, book discussions and things about our connectivity program and other things. So, you know, watch us, follow what we're doing, and, you know, try to help us out, be involved in those other things as well. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now, if I can figure out how to do that. And while I'm trying to do that, do you see any questions there that pop out right away? Oh, here we go. I can look at the chat. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we have some in the Q&A, and then we also have some in the chat.
Okay, well, I'll start in Q&A and move on from there. Okay, Margaret, you know, what people can do who no longer live in Virginia. Again, you know, kind of following us and making sure that you support us and groups like those that I named is one thing. It is possible for there are tasks that I think we're going to be able to give people to help with these efforts. One of the things we need to do is not only kind of gather that information that volunteer monitors are putting together, but we need to combine that with what we're finding from the agency inspectors and those kinds of reports too, to create a whole picture. We've had folks in the past do things like review aerial photos and things like that. So I won't give you specifics, all the specifics right now, but there are a range of things that people can help with. And we hope that you will. So Greta says, what's the definition of surface waters? In Virginia, well, surface waters are frankly any of the waters that emerge from the ground or flow across the ground. So they can be a spring, they can be a small creek all the way up to a river, and of course they include wetlands. Now, one important definition here is that Virginia has the authority to regulate essentially all waters in the state. State waters, which fall under their purview, are everything on the surface and below the surface in Virginia. So their duties, their authorities are very, very broad there. I hope I answered that well. Bill Limpert, okay, neither FERC nor PHMSA has issued a violation despite the pipe coating problems, landslides, water quality violations. You're right. And again, that's not acceptable. I will tell you, part of the reason that I focus on the state of Virginia is that, we have really strong tools there. That's what I've been trying to explain. FERC does not have a good record of enforcement. And as you've learned, PHMSA, the pipeline hazard, the safety group, also doesn't have a great record. But in any case, we're not going to give up on insisting that they do their jobs. Okay, so the question is, I said they won't be allowed to ignore a stop work order. Again, how will it be enforced? Well, again, first of all, there generally haven't been stop work orders issued when they should have been, at least on the DEQ side. There was that one instance, and to my knowledge, they did stop work in that case. Now, if DEQ goes the length of issuing a stop work order, whether it's on a specific section or the whole length of the pipeline, they can take action, they can go to court. Again, I don't say that that's going to be easy to get them to do, but we're going to insist on it. Now, I think maybe what you're getting at is that there have been other stop work orders, including with the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals most recently, and there were activities happening that probably shouldn't have been happening or may not have been allowed. And frankly, that's kind of a separate issue. All we can do is insist that our folks here, the people who are supposed to be working for us, do their job in these particular ways. Can the Water Control Board request or require DEQ enforcement when violations are found? They certainly can request them. They can express, a strong opinion as to why they're necessary. They, I don't believe, have the authority to force DEQ to issue a stop work order. But they usually are a party to these actions. For example, when Virginia sued MVP way back in 2019 over 300 plus violations, the Water Board was a party to that and had to be had to approve of that action. So they do have a role. Their role has been weakened a bit in some areas by the General Assembly in the last couple of years, but it's still important to get their voices in there and to get them to place whatever pressure they can on DEQ. And frankly, you know, the public exposure of these things, whether it's through our releases, through the media, through our lawmakers, you know, again, members of the General Assembly don't have a direct authority to push DEQ to do something, but they can certainly exert pressure, can exert, you know, their best efforts. And some of them have been very, very good at that. Okay, I'm going to move on to chat now. If I can close Q&A. What can you do if DEQ administrators dismiss your concerns? Can you take state regulators to court? Generally not. Unfortunately, the discretion as to when and how to apply enforcement or to enact enforcement is generally considered kind of within the realm of those agencies, and in general, courts don't allow those kinds of suits. There is something called a Clean Water Act citizen suit, whereas if the agency doesn't enforce the Clean Water Act under those 401 water quality certifications, that it is possible for citizens to basically step in and do it for them or instead of them. So that's always one possibility. But again, we have to use all the influence we've got. We have to use, you know, our members of the General Assembly. And, you know, the fact is that we may not expect necessarily the best from this administration because of other decisions they've made. But that doesn't mean that you know, there isn't some strong support in different areas and frankly in both parties and members of the General Assembly and others to pay attention to these issues. So, you know, we have to use all those forces that we can. June 13, 2021 was a Sunday. Okay, that might, as I pointed out, that was the one day in that 5-day period when DEQ didn't report some of those serious problems, and maybe that's the reason it was a Sunday. DEQ has constructed an unreality. Well, yes, you're right. DEQ has essentially pretended that water quality standards either weren't violated or that they didn't apply at all. But as I've explained to you, we know they do apply. And we're going to keep telling them that they apply. We're going to keep telling the water board, and we're going to keep pushing them to do what the law says. And again, you know, that's the tool that's available to us, to use that kind of pressure to do the job. I will say, when it comes to pressure on any of these officials, that even though many of us, probably most of you, think that we just beat our heads against a brick wall in insisting on these things, that some of the things that are there that have made somewhat of a difference are because of all of us. That Upland water quality certification, DEQ, I don't believe would have ever even done that certification if we had not insisted on it early in this process. I believe they were prepared and would have been content to only do the certification for the water body crossings, because their regulations didn't spell out specific procedures for those Upland certifications. We forced them to do that, and we forced them to do that even though they didn't want to. Frankly, I think they knew they would be embarrassed by not doing it, and they knew that they would be vulnerable. This change in state law, this strengthened stop work authority, that was because of all of us. That wasn't some lawmaker who just all of a sudden said, hey, this is a great idea. That's because, we put it forward. So as discouraging as it all can be, I never give up, and I exhort you not to do so either. When we document violations of the law, how do we get it attended to? Who cares within state government? It's kind of the same argument. I will tell you, having been a DEQ person for quite a few years early in my career, that there are folks there who want to do their job. And sometimes by having the outside pressure, they get a better chance to do things that they wouldn't be able to do because of their bosses. So again, there's no magic potion here. I can't promise you that they'll do what they're supposed to do. All I can tell you is that we will continue to insist on it. We'll use every tool available to us, and that's what we can do. So many violations previously. The expectation is that it will go in a similar way this time. Do you suggest engaging legislators, elected officials? Absolutely. Again, I know some of those legislators who voted for those stronger protections are not happy. Some of them have expressed real displeasure, real anger at the fact that they weren't used the way they should be. So absolutely, their voices matter. And I don't care, what party they're from. I don't care where they're from. They matter. And there are folks from, all across the spectrum who kind of care about landowners, who care about, what's being done to people out there, or at least they claim to. So we have to call them on it. How can we get them to stand up for underground water resources? That's a little harder, but the fact is that it's all connected. So if we're protecting the surface waters, then they also have to protect those areas. When they're doing some of those activities, if they're causing groundwater to collect in those bore pits, for example, that's got to go somewhere. So they have a responsibility to protect that also. I'm trying to catch up here. Citizen suits, new to me, may be useful. Officials in Virginia will do as they have done for many years. So it is, again, up to citizens. Again, I don't hold out false promises as far as citizen suits. There are some difficulties in doing those, but at the same time, they're a tool that's on the table and that we will keep in mind. We'll use it if we can. Okay, 2 cases still pending in the federal, actually, it's the Federal Appeals Court in Richmond. What would happen if you're to win there? I think we all can guess that if we were to win, then MVP and the federal government would likely go to the Supreme Court, which I think is what you're anticipating. Based on, and actually it was not just the Chief Justice who ruled on that issue, that emergency appeal. It was the whole court, according to what the order they put out. But no, I wouldn't take that as necessarily a determinant as to what they would do for this larger appeal for the underlying issues. Those kinds of stays and how you deal with those are under a certain set of rules that apply specifically to those kinds of, you might say, emergency measures. And so the fact that we didn't get our side, we didn't win in those cases, does not necessarily mean that the Supreme Court wouldn't go the right way, or what we believe to be the right way on the underlying case. Obviously we have laid out our precedents, our arguments as to what previous Supreme Court law says, as to what all the cases say through time. And courts have, in very pointed ways, said, Congress, you're not supposed to step into the business that is devoted to the courts, that the Constitution says we're supposed to have authority over. So again, that would be the case, and I'm sure it would be made as strongly as possible. It might help to post the names of those that voted for the higher standards in 2021. Yeah, I think we could probably do that. I'll be honest, in the Senate, it was a very big vote, as I recall. I think it may have been closer in the House, but it was a good majority. I know, at least in the Senate. So and I will say that we have thanked those folks going forward, and we need to continue not only to ask them to step up and use their voices, but to thank them when we do, and we try to let people know when there's an opportunity for that. We're getting towards the end of the hour. Have I missed any that you can see, Kylie?
No, I don't see any that you missed.
Okay. Well, I hope that I answered your questions. I mean, certainly you're free. You're welcome to ask more going forward. We're going to be here. We're not going anywhere. We're going to continue to try to help you understand these rules and to effectively use whatever powers we have, even though it's not as strong as we would like. It is important. And I see that Jess Sims has given you a link here that I think is going to take you to, that takes you to one of those laws, and shows you who voted there. So feel free to use that to check that out. And again, if you're in one of those folks' districts, even if you're nowhere near the pipeline, it'd be good to let them know that you appreciate that and that you will continue to be working on this and want their help. So with that, we're at 8 o'clock, and I think I have done my best to answer your questions. Look out for the follow-up email. And again, let your friends, let your family, let everybody know about this, and let them know they have a place in helping this make this work. And we do intend to not only limit the pollution, but to stop it. So thanks for your help, and have a good evening, everybody.